Welcome by Mitch Talks. 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 Welcome by a new video with me, Awake Aware with Mitch. Today I'm going to discuss listening to somebody, but also the feeling that you've been heard when you have something to say. Let me first start with explaining that we all can relate to that feeling that you want to tell something to someone, right? There is something that need to get off of your chest, or maybe something you're excited to share, or maybe a difficult topic, or maybe you are full of emotions, but there is a reason why you want to speak to someone or why you want to tell this story. So every time you open up to someone or you start a conversation, you actually want them to listen, right? And unfortunately, we live in a society that has taught us differently. And you are maybe wondering, but what do you exactly mean? So as I said, what you might not be aware of is that when you tell a story to someone, and maybe think about yourself as well, one of the first things we automatically do is we grab onto something that is familiar to our story, and then we say to someone, oh, I understand because this and that happened to me as well, or I was in that same situation, I did this, or I know I had exactly the same thing, but then with a guy or with a girl. So instead of listening, we grab onto something, and instead of replying what someone is telling us, we start talking about ourselves. And don't get me wrong, I know where this is coming from, because you want to make sure that someone feels heard or has the feeling that what they are telling, what they are sharing, that you do understand. And this brings me back to the moment, or like the phase in my life that I was having like my darkest moments. When I started talking to someone or to a friend, they weren't able to listen. They replied with something they were familiar with, but they weren't actually listening. So then all of a sudden I was like, but this is not about you. This is about me wanting to share something, and hopefully you can give advice or say, hey, I hear you, it's fine, or whatsoever. And for a longer period, I had a hard time letting go because I felt like this is weird. Like, am I doing the same thing to like my other friends when they are sharing their stories or like something they want to tell? And then all of a sudden it got to me. So what happens actually is that there is a comfort zone in our society with having a conversation. But actually, it's a lie. And since that became so clear to me, I wasn't angry anymore, because I used to have the tendency to be very angry at my friends for not listening. And all of a sudden, I was like, but actually, it's not them, it's our society that taught us something else. So all of a sudden, what isn't actually normal became normal to us. Because that's how we do. That's how all our friends communicate, or at least a lot of friends or a lot of people in our society, in the world. So then I was like, this is interesting. This is very interesting, because if we can change that like way of having a conversation, of having to listen to someone, then maybe our friendships are like starting to develop. Maybe we will understand each other much more, instead of replying for something that we are familiar with. And most of all, that you feel less alone. Because what happens when you open up to someone and someone replies with something they are familiar with, it breaks down what you are telling or your story. So you feel like what you are telling is not like worthy, or people are not listening. And then you have the tendency to feel alone, or the feeling of not being heard. If we're gonna look at from both perspectives, perspective one, you are telling a story and you have the feeling that you haven't been heard. What does that to you? And how does it make you feel? On the other hand, can you relate to sometimes not listening or not actually listening? Or do you have maybe a comfort zone of replying with things you are familiar with? And don't get me wrong, I have many times that I'm getting too enthusiastic or that I want to talk about myself. But sometimes there is a chance to talk about yourself, or when you have a party, or when you start a conversation yourself. But see if you can really draw back the energy in focusing into what is someone telling me and what can I do to be a better friend. Or 5 easy things to think about when you have your next conversation. 1. First, ask yourself the question, am I listening? Am I truly listening? Or should I maybe take a little bit more energy to focus on what they're actually telling? 2. When your friend or your family member or your colleague is finishing up their story, you want to make sure that you give them a clear notion of I heard you, I fully embraced what you were telling, I was fully focused, my concentration was with you. 3. Third part. This is where it comes tricky because normally we tend to talk about ourselves, but this time instead of talking about yourself, you're going to ask deeper questions. How did this happen? How do you feel? Can I do something for you? All those questions that gives your friend or your family member the chance to tell more about the topic they want to share. 4. You want to make sure that you do understand. If not, ask more questions. If you fully understand, then we go on to step 5. Final part, you want to make sure that someone feels heard, someone feels supported, and someone of your friend feels loved. So make sure you speak that out loud, like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. Can I do something for you? Maybe show some compassion, some empathy. And that's a very nice way to end up a conversation or maybe reach out a helping hand. Last part, so let it be clear, there is a difference between a conversation when having a party or when someone is trying to tell something more vulnerable or something that is more serious. So in that way, you can filter for yourself, can I talk about myself? Can we have a fun time? Or do I maybe need to focus on truly listening and not taking this as a chance to talk about myself? I am super curious what you guys think about this topic and about if you can relate to what I was saying. If you enjoyed this video, please do a thumbs up and press the subscribe button. And I hopefully see you in my upcoming video and have a beautiful week ahead.